Welcome to PHP Lesson 2, Expressions and Functions. We'll look at conditions, loops, and functions. All three in PHP are very similar to their JavaScript counterparts. The syntax of a PHP if statement is very similar to the JavaScript syntax, and the concept is identical. A question is asked, some code is executed if the answer is yes, otherwise the code is ignored. Here's an example of an if statement. The value of x is less than 30 will be displayed. Nothing will be displayed if the value of x is greater than 30. Try out the example and change the value of x to be greater than 30 and less than 30 to see what happens in both situations. With the if statement, only one piece of code will be executed depending on a condition. With the if-else statement, two pieces are executed depending on a condition. In this example, x is 35, so we'll get the value of x is greater than 30 displayed. We would get the value of x is less than or equal to 30 if the value of x was something like 28, for example. Once you start using else-if-else statements, you can check conditions all day long. The code will get unwieldy with too many conditions, however. Here's an example of an if-else-if-else statement. X is 30, so we'll get the value of x is 30 displayed. We would get the value of x is less than 30 if it were something like 28, for example. We would get the value of x is greater than 30 if it were 35, for example. Make sure you try out the code at PHP Fiddle, and this is a very lean example. We could have absolutely anything happen between the curly brackets. The code does get very unwieldy with too many else-if conditions, so in certain situations you want to use a switch statement to handle any number of conditions. N is the value to match. The code that belongs to the case that matches the value will be executed. The default code will be executed if nothing matches. Here's an example of a switch statement. It will display you chose an avocado. Change the value of the food choice variable to carrot or beet and see what happens. Change the value of the food choice variable to something like apple to experience the default. Use a loop to repeat code for different iterations of a similar statement. The loop repeats until a condition is met. With a while loop, the code stops repeating once something is false. An analogy would be, we will mow the lawn every Sunday while the lawn is green. Here's an example of a while loop. X is less than 1, so it displays the number is 1 plus a line break. X++ increments x by 1, so x is now 2. It still meets the while condition, so the code runs again. It displays the number is 2 plus the line break. Over and over until the while condition is no longer true once x equals 5. The do while loop is very similar to the while loop, except it executes the code before it checks the condition. So you get at least one iteration regardless of whether the condition is met. Here's an example of a do while loop. Try it out, and also try it out with the value of x as 7, for example. Anything larger than 5, essentially. The for loop checks a counter variable for a value and runs the code if the answer is true. 3 parameters or statements are part of the for loop. The first statement initializes the counter, the number the counter starts at. The second tests the counter, executes the code if true. The third increases or decreases the counter value. Here's a for loop example. Make sure you try it out. Try replacing the 0 with 5. Try replacing the 10 with 55. Try replacing the a++ with a equals a plus 5 with dollar symbols, of course. With for each loops, for every loop iteration, the value of the current array element is assigned to value, and the array pointer is moved by 1 until it reaches the last array element. Here's a for each example, and here's what a PHP array looks like. The for each loops through the array until it reaches the last element, then it stops. It knows the array's length. Make sure you try it out. A function allows us to repeat a task more than once in a document. We also use functions for a particular task. There are many functions built into PHP. We use different values in the form of parameter argument pairs, similar to variable value pairs. The function can be called in a few different ways. To create a function, we use the keyword function, then the name of the function, no special characters, and it's got to begin with a letter. Brackets, parameters, if applicable, separated by commas inside the brackets. Code to execute in curly brackets. The syntax is identical to JavaScript functions. Try out this PHP function example. Notice we call the function 3 different times with 3 different arguments. The A and B are the parameters. The values we pop into the parameters when we call the function are the arguments. For example, 12 and 12 in the third function call.